I mean, I think it's pretty important to try to clarify things like that all the time. Like in the case of Emily Harrington climbing Golden Gate in a day, which I think was the first female in a day ascent of Golden Gate, which, you know, you're like, that's cool. And it was a really good effort for her. She put a lot of work into it and then managed to see it through and do it. But I mean, a lot of the mainstream media reports about it reported her free climbing El Cap, meaning free soloing El Cap, because they don't know the difference, or sort of implying free soloing El Cap because mainstream media doesn't really know the difference. And those are the kinds of stylistic things that really matter. Like, you know, it's important for her to clarify that no, she was using a rope and she did have a partner. And, you know, that's like, I mean, free climbing versus free soloing, I think is a big one. Like things like that. I don't know. I mean, I think though at the end of the day, you can't totally control what mainstream media writes about an ascent. All you can really do is, when given the opportunity, be as honest as possible and clarify as much as possible. But it's not like you can actually track people down and force them to change headlines or take news pieces down or like actually edit things. You know, I mean, all you can really do is like be truthful about it when you're spoken to. Because I've had tons and tons of sort of mainstream newscasters introduce me as like the world's best climber or like the, you know, the world's most whatever, like some crazy thing. And all you can really do is like, oh, you know, appreciate it. That's probably not true. And, you know, like kind of like, ah, shucks, like laugh about it. We're like, oh, that's not like, that's certainly not how I would introduce myself. But it's like, you can't really control what people say in like an introduction or something.
You know, it makes me think. I was just watching an interview with Novak Djokovic, who just won, or in Arthur Ashe Stadium, he won the U.S. Open, and I think climbing is probably the only sport, just because of how misunderstood it is to mainstream media. Climbing is probably one of the only sports where people are potentially introduced like their achievements are like way inflated on accident on TV. Do you know what I'm saying? Or in an interview and stuff like that. Like I imagine that there's most, like, you know, Rafael Nadal probably has a team of publicists that follow around people who are underreporting how many Grand Slams he has or how many, you know what I'm saying? But I think to answer your question, Fitz, I think that the amount of effort that you put into stuff like this is directly proportional to your integrity as a professional. I think that, like, in Alex's case, it's a little different because, you know, he receives more media than almost anybody. And if I were in his shoes, I don't know that I would have the energy for it, but I try my best. I'm really proud of the accomplishments that I've had in my climbing and how hard I've worked for 20 years to be where I am now. And I'm so proud of it that I don't want it misrepresented. I don't want to be represented as much better or having done something that I haven't done. In the same way, you know, if I can, I'd like to not be represented. I'd like for my achievements and the effort that I put in to be highlighted. I don't want it to be like completely wasted too, you know? So I think that there's a balance there, but if I'm totally honest, personally, I would feel much worse about someone misrepresenting me in a way that I felt like inflating something that I have done or something, you know, my achievements in my career, than I would about them maybe being not totally understanding of what I've done and maybe like commenting on it in a way that it was
No, I feel totally the same way.
Less important.
It's better to exceed expectations than sort of underperform. You know, it's better to
Totally.
have somebody you know, introduce you as having done less than you've done, because you're like, oh, at least I know that you know, you can still feel good about that. But yeah, it's terrible when somebody introduces. I mean, when someone legitimately is like, "You're the best climber in the world," and you're like, "Oh man," you're like, "No," because then you got to give a whole long talk about Adam Mondra and Alex Megos and
Yeah,
all
exactly.
these other people, and you're kind of like, yeah, I mean, yeah, no, we do share a name, but he's actually a lot better, like way better.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. And then, because then you're just reminded of your own,
Yeah, exactly. Your own failings.
You're like, look, I think about it every day,
Yeah,
how much
exactly.
worse I am than these other people. And so now I'm going to have to go through this whole 20-minute thing of describing to you why that's true.
Yeah, but so the challenge though with mainstream media is like, if you're on Jimmy Kimmel, let's say, and you know that your whole bit is going to be 3.5 minutes, and he gives an intro where he's like, welcome to the best climber in the world, and everybody starts to applaud, and you're sort of like, I'm not going to spend the 3 minutes that I have on stage explaining that Alex Megos is a better rock climber than I am, because you're like, it just doesn't really make sense. And so I think that that's where issues like this sometimes arise, though, because with mainstream media, you are cognizant of the fact that this is a very fast, short interview. So all you really can say is like, oh, I don't know if that's true, but I appreciate it. Great to be here. And then you keep going, and so
Yeah.
like,
Well,
in that particular case, you're kind of like, well, it's not like the most scrupulously honest thing you could say, but you are just working with what you have. You're like freaking in this particular, I mean, this is a real example that I'm using it. Freaking what's his name, 50 Cent was coming on right after me, and you're kind of like, like they don't freaking care who rock climbs better in the world. They're waiting for 50 Cent to come on and freaking do his
yeah, that's a good
performance.
point.
I'm kind of like, I just need to get off the stage so that 50 can come on. You're like, I don't know.
Okay, well, on that note, when I get my first Jimmy Kimmel interview, I'll make sure to go to you for some Publicist and just general like marketing information.
Yeah,
I need some counseling.
Well, I think that is actually at the heart of some of the sort of lies of omission in climbing, is that it just takes too long to explain exactly what you did or how you did it, and then somebody summarizes it in a way that makes you look slightly better, and you're like, oh yeah, I can just go with that because it's just simpler, it's easier. I mean, I think that's the kind of dangerous slippery slope here, and I mean,
I actually disagree. I actually think that the vast majority of cases of this type of thing that's happening is from self-reporting. And the reason I say that is because I kind of get it. Like, there's so much hard climbing happening all of the time. And it's really, a little different for you, Alex, but for a lot of other people in the professional climbing in the industry, it's up to you to, talk about how good you are, and talk about and influence people as to how important your most recent accomplishment was. And, we've all see it, right? It's basically become the Instagram standard for every single post needs to begin with the name of the route, a green check mark, the grade in every possible grading system, so that even if you're tuning in from Brazil, you know exactly how hard this person just did, exactly how hard the route is. Like the details of the ascent or exactly what may have just happened, none of that matters because people are just scrolling through and they're basically just like trying to figure out how valuable you are by that first line in whatever photo it is that they post on Instagram, right? And so I think that because that culture has become so prevalent, and it's not just everyday climbers, that's like what 99% of pro climbers are doing as well. It places so much emphasis on, you just have this sense that there's a race, right? Like you're always trying to outperform one another. And why would you even post about something that doesn't meet a certain XYZ category, And I think that kids see that happening, new climbers see that happening, pros see that happening between each other. And it just kind of breeds this constant like sense of, well, it did take me like 2 months, but it would sound so much cooler if I said I just came and tried it on weekends after big training sessions or whatever. Or, well, I did traverse 6 feet out and grab that jug that no one else in the history of climbing has ever grabbed. But if I say that, then it's not going to look that cool. And nobody's probably going to read below the fact that I did my hardest route and there's a green check mark and here's the grade anyway. So I think I can just actually leave that part out. I think that these are the kind of omissions in self-reporting. And there's more details, but you kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. I think these are the kind of things that are a little bit dangerous. And not, again, like what I mentioned before with you, Laura, like I don't even think it so much matters just for the pro climbing community. I think that people see and kind of sense that happening, and then it trickles down even to the general climbing community, and how you even might talk about things between friends and how you might talk about things, to family and whatever. And I love the point you made, Alex, about like, what would you write down in your own personal like journal? Because ultimately we should all be striving to write down that exact thing publicly, right? And it's not always easy. And there is pressure, especially when you're a pro. But I think that in the end, the closest that we can get to that is like the better off we're going to be.